that was the start of it. And then I started writing about men, fatherhood, and that was the tin hat, you know. And for literally for the next 15 years, almost I would say to the day I left, they were on my case about writing about fatherhood, writing about men, writing about men's suicide, men's health, domestic violence, and so on. There was an incident which I've detailed in my book where the aforementioned Vincent Brown, who I used to be quite friendly with, rang me one day in quite a state of agitation, and this was about 2001, and he said, I have to talk to you, he says. I have to talk to you, very urgently. I says, okay. So I met him downtown, and we had in a coffee shop, and I said, what's wrong with you? And he says, I have something very important to say to you, very grave matter. He said, I was in the Irish Times yesterday. I don't often go in, he says, but I happened to be in there. And when I was there, he says, I happened to overhear a conversation between two very senior editors, and they were talking about you. And what they were saying is of the gravest import for you and for your future in the newspaper. And he says, I'm very concerned that what you're doing to yourself, you may actually make yourself unemployable. I said, what? Well, they did all this men stuff, you know. Men. Okay, he said, you had a couple of good points. He said, but you're going too far now with this domestic violence stuff, you know. Because I've been doing stuff about the fact that domestic violence is actually a phenomenon that is not entirely male and female. It actually divides into three almost identically sized sectors. One is 1/3 male and female, 1/3 female on male, and 1/3 mutual. And I've written this in the paper a few times, and the Department of Health has commissioned a survey of surveys. So they wanted to get a survey of surveys to show that I was wrong. And so I was waiting for the survey of surveys, and it never appeared. And after about a year, I made some inquiries and found out that the company that had been commissioned to do the surveys was Kieran McKeown Associates. And I rang up Kieran. I had never met him before. He's a lovely man, and as I subsequently found out. But I rang up and I said, Kieran, I hear you're doing this survey. He says, oh yes. And I said, how's it going? He says, oh, it's finished. Oh, now how come it hasn't been published? He says, well, if you find out the answer to that question, maybe you might let me know, because it's all finished and ready to go. And I said, can I ask you what it entailed, what it involves, what was your answer to the conundrum? He says, surely. He says, we discovered that domestic violence divides into three sectors. Male and female, 1/3. Female on male, 1/3. Mutual, 1/3. So it's not going to appear. He says, well, if you find out the answer to that question, let me know. So I kicked up a stink. I ran a couple of articles in the Irish Times, and as a result, they did publish it on their website, so the Department of Health website, but they got an American feminist to write an analysis debunking the survey that they had spent about 20 grand of taxpayers' money on, or attempting to debunk it. I mean, totally spuriously, of course. This is the kind of stuff that we used to go on. So anyway, back to Vincent in the cafe, and he says, you know, this domestic violence stuff, you know, it's totally wrong. It's totally over the top. I said, well, Vincent, can you tell me, you were saying there like, that I had a few good points. Could you tell me what they were? He says, well, you know, you had a good point about male suicide. I mean, yeah, that you were the first to say that, and that was, you know, that was a good one, yeah. Anything else? Oh, he said the family courts. You know, people are beginning to wake up to that, you know, and you know, they're acknowledging that you had a point there as well. I said, oh. So I said, maybe if we wait another 5 or 10 years, they might realize that I have a good point about domestic violence as well. See, this is the way it goes. Like, no matter how much evidence you have, there is something else. And that is the ideology, which works by convincing everybody that it is true. You don't need evidence to prove to everybody that it's true. You just need to keep telling them the same thing every day in numerous channels. And they come to think that this is actually as solid as that. And so, no amount of evidence will, by one person, or even 1,000 persons individually, will actually effectively challenge that. So this went on for a number of years, and there were delegations to the editor about me, and on an almost a weekly basis. The editor would occasionally sidle up to me in the Irish Times, the newsroom, where I had a desk for a while. and he would make kind of, slightly oblique comments about things, this way over my head. Kind of I was supposed to read in some way, I think, it's asking me what I thought of the TV coverage in the paper, I go home and think, what's that mean now? That means maybe I could do it a rest from writing a column and maybe do the TV notes instead or something like that, So what I would do then, I would pull down my copy of it, which was well used in the end, John Stewart's On Liberty, which is an excellent thing about freedom of speech. And I would write another column about the importance of freedom of speech in society and the importance of the media in facilitating people to speak their minds and speak their truths. And then you would leave it alone for another few months. This was the kind of guerrilla war I had to fight. Now this shouldn't be necessary. I was employed to work in the Irish Times to write the things that I believed to be true, if I could stand them up, if I could write them well. Nobody said I couldn't do either of those. But they still wanted me. They didn't want me to leave. That's the interesting thing. What they wanted me to do was stop writing the things I was writing and write something else. So the people who had employed me wanted me to become like them, and like all the other people they had employed. Because that was a necessary part of them validating the entire exercise, because that's how they make the truth the truth. That's how they make the lie the truth. If they can get people who were previous dissenters to say, I was wrong. I mean, this is a technique which the Soviets used to great effect when they would, have some dissident sell a few of his comrades down the river. He would then be dragged into public view, and he would make a public confession of all his sins, and then they would hang him. And that's kind of what they wanted to do to me. But I would never do the confession, and I would never do the retraction. And in the end, they hung me anyway. But that was another story. To look at the underbelly of this, I mean, this is, you see, that this is what I mean. That immediate, I meet people all the time. I see them in cafes with the Irish Times, and I feel like going up and saying, do you realise the shit you have in your hands? Do you have any idea how that thing is put together and the kind of people who are behind it? Like, they have no idea. They think it's a newspaper that it tells them the truth. It looks like a newspaper, you see. And that's enough. And therefore, people repeat what's in it. Because they think that there's some kind of process by which only the truth could possibly get in there. But that isn't true at all. It's quite the contrary in many instances. There's a little bit of truth in there. There are a few journalists who are worthwhile, good journalists. I mean, most of them I started off myself when I was lecturer in Dublin and McGill. Colm Keane is a good example. He was a brilliant journalist. Great investigative reporter, always was back in the 80s. But in general, more and more journalists just see their role as being to promote a particular ideology, and that ideology is the one that is sometimes referred to as globalism, sometimes referred to as cultural Marxism. It's a kind of a collision of these ideologies. And journalists really are now the priesthood of these ideologies, as opposed to being the priesthoods of the profession of journalism. So, in a sense, you need a different word when you look at certain people and you're about to say, he's a jerk. No, he's not. He's a propagandist with the Irish Times. He's a propagandist with RTE. He's not a journalist. They're not journalists. It has ceased to be. And so, therefore, our democracy is endangered by the fact, not so much by them. That isn't what endangers our democracy. What endangers our democracy is that we do not see them for what they are. We do not see what they're doing. And we're allowing them to continue and to tell our neighbours the same lies every day, so that our neighbours don't get the opportunity that maybe the people we in this room have had to be awoken by some event or by some encounter in our lives. Maybe a book we read, maybe that started us off, maybe somebody we met, maybe something that happened. For me, it was things that happened to me. And I'll just say what they were. There were three things in my life that caused me to stop on that road, that leftist road, soft leftist road,